The saga began with Karen, a name that has become synonymous with entitlement and inconsiderate behavior. In this particular instance, her target was my meticulously cultivated hedge, a lush, vibrant green border that defined the edge of my property and provided a touch of natural beauty to the neighborhood. This hedge, however, became the object of Karen's casual disregard, her personal shortcut, a victim of her insatiable desire to shave a few seconds off her commute. Day in and day out, Karen, in her oversized SUV, would nonchalantly drive right over a section of my prized hedge. The crunch of branches under her tires, the tearing of leaves, the deep gouges left in the earth, these were the sounds and sights that became a constant, unwelcome part of my daily life. The once pristine hedge, a testament to my time and effort, was slowly but surely being transformed into a mangled mess. At first I, like any reasonable person, attempted a civil approach. I crafted a polite sign, a simple request asking that she refrain from driving over the hedge. I placed it prominently near the damaged area, hoping that a gentle nudge would be enough to deter her. My optimism, however, was short-lived. The sign was not only ignored, but it seemed to embolden her. She continued her destructive behavior, seemingly taking pleasure in the blatant disregard for my property. I then decided to take a more direct approach. I waited for her to return and, mustering all the politeness I could manage, approached her. I explained that her actions were damaging the hedge, that it was a significant expense to replace, and that there was a perfectly good street she could use just a few feet away. My reasonable plea was met with a scoff, a dismissive wave of her hand, and that now familiar condescending smirk. "It's just a hedge," she retorted, as if my property, my efforts, and my feelings were utterly inconsequential. She spoke with an air of superiority, as if she were above such petty concerns. I tried to reason with her, pointing out the cost of replacing the plants, the time it took to cultivate them, and the simple fact that it was disrespectful to damage someone else's property. But my words fell on deaf ears. She simply rolled her eyes, put her car in gear, and drove off, leaving me standing there, fuming with frustration and disbelief. The situation escalated. The tire tracks became deeper and more pronounced, scarring the earth and further damaging the already struggling hedge. The once thick and vibrant greenery began to thin, revealing the bare branches beneath. It was a constant visual reminder of Karen's entitlement and her complete disregard for my property. I felt violated, my personal space invaded, my efforts mocked. I considered contacting the Homeowners Association (HOA), but I knew from past experiences that they were notoriously slow to act, often bogged down in bureaucracy and more likely to side with the wealthier residents, a category Karen certainly fit into. I had heard stories of their inaction, their tendency to prioritize appearances over substance, and their reluctance to confront those who wielded influence within the community. I knew that filing a complaint with the HOA would likely be a long and frustrating process, with little chance of a positive outcome. I felt helpless, trapped in a situation where I was constantly being victimized, and my voice seemed to carry no weight. The anger simmered within me, a slow burn that threatened to erupt. I began meticulously documenting each instance of Karen driving over the hedge. I took photos and videos, capturing her blatant disregard for my property. I knew I needed evidence if I was going to take any kind of action, if I was going to fight back against this injustice. The repeated trampling wasn't just about the hedge anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fundamental principle of common courtesy. It was about Karen's complete lack of consideration for her neighbors and her deeply ingrained belief that she was above the rules, that she could do whatever she pleased without consequence. The once peaceful and tranquil atmosphere of my neighborhood, a place where I had always felt safe and comfortable, was now tainted by Karen's selfish and destructive actions. Her behavior cast a shadow over everything, poisoning the sense of community and leaving me feeling resentful and violated. I knew I couldn't let her continue to get away with it. I couldn't allow her to trample over my property, my rights, and my sense of peace. The thought of revenge, however small, began to take root in my mind. It wasn't about petty vindictiveness, it was about justice, about making her understand the consequences of her actions. It was about teaching her that she couldn't just run roughshod over everyone else's property without facing repercussions. The hedge, once a symbol of beauty and tranquility, had become a battleground, a symbol of the larger conflict between Karen's entitlement and my desire for peace and respect. And I was determined to fight for it, to reclaim my sense of ownership and to restore order to my little corner of the world. The anger and frustration I felt were not just about the hedge. They were about a fundamental principle, the idea that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and that no one has the right to disregard the rights and feelings of others. Karen's actions had crossed a line, and I knew I had to do something, anything to push back. The repeated incursions onto my property, the blatant disregard for my polite requests, and the dismissive attitude of Karen fueled a growing sense of injustice within me. The hedge, once a source of pride, now stood as a constant reminder of Karen's entitlement and my powerlessness to stop her. Each crushed branch, each tire track etched into the earth, felt like a personal insult. The frustration gnawed at me, a constant hum of resentment that permeated my thoughts. Sleep became restless, punctuated by replays of Karen's SUV rumbling over my hedge. Her smug expression burned into my memory. I found myself spending more and more time staring out the window, watching for her inevitable arrival, my blood pressure rising with each passing moment. The once peaceful rhythm of my life had been disrupted, replaced by a simmering anger that threatened to consume me. The documented evidence, the photos and videos I had diligently collected, served as a tangible record of Karen's transgressions. They were more than just images, they were proof, ammunition in a battle I felt compelled to fight. I knew that simply complaining to the HOA was unlikely to yield any results. Their history of inaction and their tendency to favor the more affluent residents left me with little hope for a fair resolution. I needed something more, something that would not only stop Karen's destructive behavior but also make her understand the consequences of her actions. I needed to find a way to make her respect my property, my boundaries, and my feelings. The thought of revenge, initially a fleeting whisper, began to solidify into a concrete plan. It wasn't about petty retaliation, it was about reclaiming some sense of control, about restoring balance to a situation that had become overwhelmingly unfair. I started researching different options, exploring ways to protect my hedge without resorting to anything illegal or dangerous. I considered installing a physical barrier, something that would prevent Karen from driving over the hedge. However, the cost of a permanent structure was prohibitive, and I worried that it would detract from the aesthetics of my property. I also considered planting thorny bushes or other deterrents, but I was concerned about the potential for injury to anyone who might accidentally come into contact with them. The idea of using the law also crossed my mind. I explored the possibility of filing a lawsuit against Karen for property damage, but the legal process seemed daunting and expensive. I also worried about the potential for escalation, the possibility that Karen would retaliate in some way, making the situation even worse. I needed a solution that was effective, safe, and wouldn't create more problems than it solved. I continued to research, searching for inspiration, looking for a way to turn the tables on Karen and make her understand the impact of her actions. I read stories online, tales of people who had dealt with similar situations, some resorting to creative and unconventional methods to protect their property and assert their rights. These stories gave me hope, a sense that I wasn't alone in my struggle. The seeds of a plan began to germinate in my mind. It wouldn't be about causing harm or damage, it would be about creating a consequence, a carefully orchestrated response that would make Karen think twice before driving over my hedge again. It would be a lesson, a subtle but powerful message that would communicate my frustration and my determination to protect my property. The plan started to take shape, fueled by my anger, my frustration, and my unwavering belief that I deserved respect. It was a risky strategy, a gamble that could either backfire spectacularly or deliver the perfect dose of poetic justice. But I was willing to take the risk. I had reached my breaking point, and I knew I had to do something, anything, to stop Karen's relentless trampling of my hedge and my sense of peace. The feeling of helplessness was slowly being replaced by a sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim, I was a strategist, a planner, a force to be reckoned with. The hedge, once a symbol of my frustration, was now becoming a symbol of my resilience, my determination to fight for what was right. The plan, carefully crafted and meticulously thought out, was ready to be put into action. It wasn't about causing physical harm or damage to Karen or her vehicle. It was about creating a consequence, a subtle but impactful lesson that would deter her from ever driving over my hedge again. The key was to make the consequence directly related to her actions, something that would inconvenience her in a way that she couldn't ignore or dismiss. I knew I had to be careful, to ensure that my actions were within the bounds of the law and wouldn't expose me to any legal repercussions. I spent hours researching, consulting with friends, and even discreetly seeking advice from a lawyer to make sure my plan was foolproof. The central element of my plan involved a specific type of landscaping rock, one that was visually similar to the existing rocks in my garden but significantly heavier. These rocks, when strategically placed, would blend in seamlessly with the surrounding landscape, appearing to be just another part of my garden. However, their weight would make them impossible to move without specialized equipment. I purchased several of these rocks, carefully selecting ones that were the right size and color to match the existing landscaping. I waited for a day when Karen was away, knowing that she often left her SUV parked in her driveway for extended periods. This would give me the time I needed to execute my plan without being observed. Under the cover of darkness, I carefully transported the heavy rocks to the section of the hedge that Karen habitually drove over. I positioned them strategically, ensuring that they were partially hidden by the foliage but still close enough to the surface to make contact with the undercarriage of a vehicle. The rocks were placed in such a way that they wouldn't be visible to someone casually walking by, but they would be directly in the path of Karen's SUV tires. I worked meticulously, ensuring that the rocks were stable and wouldn't shift or move unexpectedly. I wanted to create a situation where Karen would experience an unpleasant surprise, a jarring jolt that would make her think twice before driving over my hedge again. The next day, I waited with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I knew it wouldn't be long before Karen returned and her routine would bring her right over my hedge. The tension built as the day wore on, and I found myself constantly checking the time, eager to see if my plan would work. Finally, I saw her SUV approaching, the familiar sight that had become a symbol of my frustration. I watched from my window, my heart pounding in my chest as Karen turned into the street and headed towards my property. As she approached the section of the hedge where I had placed the rocks, I held my breath. And then, it happened. The unmistakable sound of metal scraping against rock filled the air. Karen's SUV lurched to a sudden stop, the front end raised slightly as it came into contact with the strategically placed rocks. I watched as Karen emerged from her vehicle, her face a mask of confusion and annoyance. She circled her SUV, inspecting the damage to her front bumper. I could see her frustration growing as she realized that she had driven over something that she couldn't simply move out of the way. She tried rocking her car back and forth, but the rocks remained firmly in place. She even tried to push them with her foot, but they were too heavy to budge. The look on her face was priceless. The smugness, the entitlement, the air of superiority, all of it was gone, replaced by a look of bewildered frustration. She paced back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, presumably calling for assistance. I watched from my window, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. It wasn't about gloating or reveling in her misfortune. It was about justice, about finally making her understand the consequences of her actions. She had repeatedly disregarded my requests, dismissed my concerns, and treated my property with contempt. Now, she was experiencing a small taste of the inconvenience and frustration that she had inflicted upon me. The rocks, strategically placed and carefully chosen, had delivered their message. The hedge, once a symbol of my frustration, was now a symbol of my resilience, my ability to stand up for myself and protect my property. The sweet taste of revenge, not in a malicious way, but in a way that restored balance and order, filled me with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The immediate aftermath of the strategically placed rock incident was a fascinating study in Karen's unraveling composure. Her initial reaction was a predictable mix of confusion and annoyance. She emerged from her SUV, her face a mask of bewilderment, circling the vehicle as if trying to understand how such a predicament could have befallen her. The sight of her meticulously manicured lawn ornament, now tilted at an awkward angle, clearly did not compute. She seemed to be searching for a logical explanation, a reason for the sudden and jarring halt to her routine shortcut. Her eyes scanned the area, but the cleverly concealed rocks blended seamlessly with the existing landscaping, offering no immediate clues. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, her annoyance escalated into visible frustration. She paced back and forth, her perfectly pedicured feet tapping impatiently on the asphalt. She bent down, peering under her SUV, trying to discern the cause of the obstruction. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed, and her lips tightened into a thin line. The carefully constructed facade of effortless composure began to crack, revealing the simmering impatience beneath. She tugged at the bumper as if she could somehow dislodge the unseen obstacle with sheer force of will. But the strategically placed rocks, heavy and unyielding, remained stubbornly in place. The phone emerged, a lifeline to the outside world. She dialed frantically, her voice rising in pitch as she recounted her predicament to whomever was on the other end. Her gestures became more animated, her perfectly manicured hands gesticulating wildly as she tried to convey the absurdity of the situation. It was clear that she was not having a pleasant conversation. The carefully crafted persona of the effortlessly chic suburbanite was beginning to crumble, revealing the raw frustration beneath. The carefully applied makeup couldn't quite conceal the flush creeping up her neck, and the perfectly coiffed hair seemed to lose some of its bounce. The arrival of the tow truck was a spectacle in itself. The large, ungainly vehicle lumbered down the street, its flashing lights announcing its arrival to the entire neighborhood. It was a scene that was sure to become fodder for local gossip for weeks to come. The tow truck driver, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. He'd clearly seen it all before. He assessed the angle of Karen's SUV, the position of the unseen rocks, and the general air of exasperation emanating from Karen herself. He gave her a knowing look, a look that suggested he understood the situation perfectly, even without being told the full story. The process of winching Karen's SUV off the rocks was slow and methodical. The tow truck driver carefully attached the hook to the undercarriage of her vehicle, ensuring that no further damage was inflicted. The winch groaned as it pulled, slowly but surely dislodging the SUV from its rocky perch. The scraping of metal against rock, the creaking of the SUV's suspension, and the grunting of the tow truck driver filled the air. It was a symphony of suburban discomfort, a soundtrack to Karen's public humiliation. As her SUV was finally freed, Karen inspected the damage, her face a mask of barely suppressed rage. The pristine image of her vehicle, a symbol of her status and success, had been tarnished. The scratches on the bumper, the dent in the undercarriage, were not just physical imperfections. They were visible reminders of her fall from grace, her moment of public misfortune. The tow truck driver presented her with the bill, a hefty sum that added insult to injury. She paid with a visible grimace, her hand trembling slightly as she signed the receipt. The carefully constructed facade of effortless wealth and privilege had been momentarily shattered, revealing the vulnerability beneath. Finally she drove off, her SUV limping slightly, a wounded symbol of suburban hubris. The scene she left behind was one of minor chaos. The carefully manicured lawn was slightly torn up, the tire tracks etched into the grass like scars. The air was thick with the lingering scent of burnt rubber and the faint aroma of Karen's expensive perfume, a final reminder of her presence. The neighbors, who had emerged from their houses to witness the spectacle, began to disperse, whispering amongst themselves, their eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. The real transformation, however, was not just the spectacle of Karen's misfortune. It was the quiet shift in the neighborhood's dynamics. From that day forward, Karen never drove over my hedge again. She would slow down as she approached my property, carefully maneuvering her SUV to avoid the edge of my lawn. It was as if the incident had instilled in her a newfound respect, not just for my hedge, but for the unspoken rules of neighborly conduct. The repeated trampling, the dismissive attitude, the air of entitlement, all of it vanished. It was replaced by a cautious respect, a tacit acknowledgement that she had crossed a line and that there were consequences for her actions. The peace that returned to my neighborhood was not just the absence of Karen's SUV rumbling over my hedge. It was a deeper, more profound peace. It was the peace of knowing that I had stood up for myself, that I had defended my property and my sense of tranquility. It was the peace of knowing that even in the face of entitlement and disregard, it is possible to find creative solutions and to restore balance to a situation that seems hopelessly unfair. The incident with Karen and the rocks became a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a story whispered among neighbors, a reminder that even the most entitled individuals can be held accountable for their actions. It was a story of David and Goliath, of the underdog standing up to a bully and prevailing. It was a story of the power of creative problem-solving and the importance of asserting one's rights. And for me it was a story of personal triumph, a testament to my resilience and my determination to protect what was mine. The hedge, once a symbol of frustration and violation, became a symbol of victory, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, it is possible to find creative solutions and restore order to one's little corner of the world.